guys, welcome back to the channel. So this is episode 2 of our discussion of the common causes of tension and injury at the keyboard. A quick little note about these videos. I'm presenting these different causes of injury in no particular order. Last video I mentioned the first cause, and I didn't mean in any way that that's the primary, and then these are all sort of getting less and less sort of common. They're all extremely common. Wow, okay. And I've dealt with them in my own plane. I've known people who have dealt with these different issues, and also my students. So they're all very common. So yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so first what we want to do is we want to just define what alignment is. And for most people, this is probably not something that they've ever really heard of. So basically, alignment at the keyboard is sort of the idea that we want to be in the best possible place to play every single note, okay? And what that means is that, let's say I'm going to play my 5th finger, okay? So my arm and my hand and even my finger is going to be in this position. Now, if I want to play my 4th finger, I'm not going to be in this same position. Notice that I'm going to shift. So notice that there's sort of this movement laterally, okay? And there even can be some up and down movement to sort of ensure that my skeletal system is all sort of in alignment to deliver the energy into the keyboard as efficiently as possible. I like using the analogy with my students of sort of delivering energy or delivering weight into the keys. And I like to think of it this way, is that if I'm going to push something with this pencil, and I'll ask them, is it more efficient to try to push it like this, right? Is that an efficient means of transferring the energy from my arm into whatever I'm trying to push? And they'll say like, no, that's not efficient. That's way harder. It's like trying to push something like this, right? And so then I'll say, okay, well, if I take the pencil like this, right? And so it's almost an extension of my arm and I'll push like that. Is that more efficient? And they're like, oh yeah, that's much better. And it's a very similar thing when it comes to the keyboard. If you think about walking, okay? When we walk, we want to make sure that our back and torso and even our head and our legs and everything is sort of aligned and balanced so that standing and walking is a very easy task. If you try walking leaning way back, or you try leaning way forwards and walking, what you'll immediately notice is that you're out of alignment and you're imbalanced. And so naturally what happens is that you tense up. Your muscles tense up because now instead of your skeletal system supporting and delivering that weight into the ground, now your muscles are having to hold and pull things up. And it's the same thing when we play the keyboard. Now, that sort of gets into why alignment, or sometimes people say balance, which is essentially the same concept but slightly different in its nuance. And that's really why it's important, because if I'm going to play a note, I need to make sure that I'm balanced so that all of the muscles in my arm and my wrist and my hand, they don't feel like they have to hold things up. And a lot of times these muscles move and work without us even thinking, sort of subconsciously, right? If you just try playing a note with a low wrist, what you'll notice if you're really in tune to your body is that there's a lot of tension in this part of our arm and wrist and everything. It's very tense, versus if I make sure I'm balanced, right, and I sort of maintain the arch between my elbow and my finger, if you will, then I feel like, well, that's really easy, okay? And so misalignment essentially causes an imbalance of the sort of ecosystem of the playing mechanism, right? The arm, hand, and fingers, or we could think of the wrist as well. And what happens is that when we have that misalignment or the misbalance, the natural byproduct is tension. It's just like the analogy of standing. If you lean way forwards and your skeletal system, your body is out of alignment, you'll notice that your abs now, right, have to hold up your torso because it's extremely heavy. And so if you try to go to the keyboard, for instance, I try to play my fifth finger like this or something, well, what I notice, even just look at these fingers. See how these fingers are immediately tense, okay? You can experiment with this at home. Try moving your hand and arm into an awkward position and then play a note and notice how different it feels versus if I could say, okay, I want to make sure that my arm is aligned behind my fifth finger. Feel the difference. It's an incredible difference, and it's a very important aspect when we play the piano. So what we're essentially trying to do is we're trying to think of alignment in terms of side to side, right? So lateral movement on the keyboard. And we also want to think of it as up and down too, sort of the vertical movement. So if I'm going to, for instance, play my fifth finger, I want to make sure that I, can draw a line, say, between my elbow and my fifth finger, right? So I'm here, and then if I'm going to play my fourth finger, I'm here, and then my third finger, I'm here, and then my second finger, I'm here, and my thumb, I'm here. So notice how we have some of that movement horizontally across. Now, there's also the aspect of vertical sort of alignment, if you will. And that's just the idea that all of our fingers are different lengths. And so if, I have this sort of nice alignment and balance, so that I'm balanced on this finger, right, just sitting at the bottom of the key, well, my third finger is much longer. And so I'm not going to be balanced on that finger here, because see how if I don't really move my arm and my wrist, I either have to collapse my knuckle joint or I have to collapse my wrist. And so notice if I'm here, or I'm playing my third finger, it's going to be slightly higher to make sure that I have that balance, right? And again, it's really just because the third finger is longer, right? So if I play my fifth finger here and my third finger here, it feels like the weight's sitting here. It doesn't really feel like the weight is sitting right here. And so when we play scale, for instance, there's going to be a certain amount of sort of almost a little bit higher to the third finger. So you can kind of see this movement. And what this does is it helps me, again, feel aligned and balanced behind each finger. And that really takes care of the problem of weak fingers, if you will, right? If you're playing something, right, 4 and 5 can be somewhat awkward to play. And so a lot of times, people ask questions about trills on 4 and 5, and a lot of times you really just want to try to find a different fingering. But that being said, if 4 and 5 feel weak, it's probably because you're not ensuring that you're always aligned behind the fingers and making those sort of lateral adjustments and even horizontal adjustments as well, because the 4 and 5 only feel weak if they're not being correctly supported by the arm, okay? And I wanted to look at a piece of music to kind of just sort of visually see how this works in repertoire. So we're going to look at, let's see, where is it? Here we go. This is the Chopin Waltz Opus 70 number 1. And I'm just going to kind of sort of play really slowly. Okay, so we have the right hand here. Okay, so let's just take that first little bit here. So if I'm aligned right here, and I shift over here, see how my elbow has to shift there? Because if my elbow stays in the same position, It feels sort of okay because I am transferring weight into the keys, but I noticed that my elbow is very tense. It's locked into a position. Muscles have a tendency to tense up, get tight, build tension if they stay in one fixed position. That's why a lot of times teachers stress this idea of exaggerated wrist motion and circle motions and even elbow movement, because if muscles are moving, they, by definition, at least have trouble tensing, okay? And so this here, right, we have this shift, and then shift, 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 shift. And then we have this shift, this little shift right here, where we have this little triplet. So notice this here, and then shift over, okay? So this is actually quite a complex passage in the sense that if you don't have that, see how much movement there's in my arm? Then shift over. So you can actually see a little bit more of this pivot in my wrist, okay? Because I can't quite just shift over here. I have to have a certain amount of pivot in my wrist, okay? But it's not too much, right? So you can see this movement in my arm and everything, so that constantly I'm making sure I'm centered, right? I'm really aligned here, and then I'm aligned here, then here, here, and then here. Again, my hand, arm, and fingers, it's not all just like this straight line, but you can see how if I was to draw a line, from the tip of my thumb to here, it's right there, okay? So again, this sort of movement. And notice from here to here, my elbow doesn't move up too much because that's kind of a slow movement. And so it's not always going to be a perfect straight sort of, line from my elbow in to the keys. Sometimes there's going to be a little bit of more pivot in the wrist, right? So like for instance, if I'm going to play some sort of, arpeggiated figure, you can see that it's sort of, there's that sort of pivot point on my middle finger. But in general, the arm is always moving with the fingers, right? So that's sort of the general idea. I hope that all of that was informative and that it made sense. Let me know in the comments down below if you have questions about that. I'd be happy to make sort of a follow-up video to sort of look at that more in depth in some different pieces. These videos are more supposed to be sort of introducing people to the concept of different things that are very common that can and do almost always induce tension and injury. But of course, like I mentioned, I'd be happy to look into them a little bit more. So thank you so much for watching, and in the next part we will look at yet another common cause of tension and injury. I'll see you guys next time.